This article is titled UFC is booming, but MMA collapsing around it? Question mark. The data is concerning. And what the data shows is real simple. There's less MMA professional fights around the world. That's it. Meanwhile, the UFC is more popular than ever before. So, as fans, what it comes down to is, should we be concerned that MMA is in decline? Maybe not MMA, but the amount of fights that are happening every year. Let's just say in 2020 or 2019, for example, there were 8,000 MMA fights. Not exact, just using a reference. And now there's 5,000 or 6,000 professional MMA fights per year. Is that a bad thing? Well, according to this article, it doesn't look good. Okay? But the truth is this happens to a lot of sports. And we can get into the lawsuits the UFC faces and things of that nature. But when you do a quick search, it doesn't take long to find out that other sports have gone through this as well. And, football, for example, the AFL and NFL merger in 1970, forming the current NFL. Prior to this, the AFL and NFL were separate, competing leagues, according to AI, right? There have been other leagues that attempted to challenge the NFL, such as the World Football League, USFL, AAFC. And right now you got smaller leagues like the UFL from the merger of XFL and USFL. All right, so this is nothing new in terms of sports. There's clearly not as many professional football games as there would have been when there's, 6 different leagues going on. When a sport is regionalized, there's going to be a bunch of different fights in those regions. People are paying attention more to the regional circuits because you don't really know who the best fighter is. If you got multiple regions, say you got 10 different regions throughout the world doing MMA, and you have 10 lightweight champions. Well, who's the champ? We don't know. So we're watching. You have to. But now the UFC has risen to the top, like the NFL. Now, of course, there's all these lawsuits going down in terms of the UFC, more or less looking like a monopoly, just to kind of centralize the whole argument of what's going on. And I mean, isn't that what you want as a fan? Do you want to be like boxing 15, 20 years ago, and you can make the case even right now, to where you have multiple promotions? Again, we've discussed this at length before. You don't know who the real champions are. There's multiple champions, things of that nature. Or do you want one UFC in terms of MMA, so okay, we know right now that Ilia Topuria is the best featherweight and lightweight in the world. Well, maybe Islam could take him, right? But I'm just saying, outside the UFC, there's not another lightweight that would even come close. So therefore, what I'm saying is the average fan is no longer paying attention as much to regional circuits. Fighters too know, okay, I got to go through this avenue. There might be a couple. What it's going to turn into, in my opinion, is a bunch of minor leagues, right? Like minor league baseball. Now that's tied in directly with MLB. It might not be tied in directly with UFC. I mean, it could happen. But you're going to have other promotions that become the minor leagues, meaning you got to go through this to get to the UFC, to maybe get to the Contender Series, and then to get a contract with the UFC. Now, it remains to be seen if the UFC is going to pay a heavy price for doing this. But I think you could easily make the argument that the NFL is a monopoly, the NBA is a monopoly, okay? A lot of other areas. Now, there are some sports that don't really have a monopoly, right? Like soccer. There's so many soccer leagues throughout the world that it's anyone's guess who the best team is. The only taste we get of the best team is when countries come together and play in the World Cup, right? Once every 4 years. But we don't know who the best individual team in the world is. And maybe I'm going out on a limb here, right? Because I don't want to act like I know everything about soccer. I know a lot about the World Cup, but soccer, you know, I talk to this one guy not every day, but every couple days when I see him, when I go in a certain store, and he's got soccer games throughout the world on. So he would probably challenge me on this topic because he knows a lot more. But I'm just making the case that we don't want a bunch of regional MMA promotions with no centralized unit at the top to where we know who the champions are. So now that the UFC is growing larger and larger and larger, that's why I'm saying the UFC is booming, but MMA, at least fights, the amount of them per year, is in decline. To me, it's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Now, when these lawsuits go to court, maybe, the UFC loses. They've already lost one, or at least had to settle. But I think if you're the UFC and you're playing the long game, settling is not a bad idea, because you're getting to the point now where you don't need to do what you did in the past as much, because now everybody wants to get to the UFC. You've established yourself. Other promotions have bit the dust in trying to challenge the UFC, right? It's not going to happen unless there's an intervention from the courts. And hopefully there's not. Because I personally stopped watching boxing because I don't know who the champ is. Especially when these promotions don't want to let their best fighter fight another promotion's best fighter because they can't agree, right? There's no central body. So we don't want the UFC to head there. So finally what I'm saying is that it's not a bad thing that MMA fights are in decline. And it's a good thing that the UFC is booming, because we now have a clear angle, if you're a fighter, on what you got to do to get to the top. And some of these lower level fight leagues will still grow, but without eyeballs on these fights, these promotions cannot survive. That's the bottom line. And they don't need to survive. A few of them will, and that's where fighters will go to test out their professional skills. And if they do well, they'll get into the UFC. In other sports like football and basketball, you got college for that. MMA is not a college sport or high school sport where there's a clear path to becoming a professional or draft or anything like that. So everybody calm down. MMA fights as a whole might be in decline, but the future of the sport is strong and healthy. That's my take.